Hi all, welcome to the Wife of Caesar. Happy Tuesday. Today we're coming at you again with a special edition because we ran across a piece of news that is so relevant that we decided to break up your week and give you a special program. Okay, so the piece of news is published by a newspaper, a Mexican newspaper known called El Universal, and the newspaper is publishing that United States authorities, namely the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission, are investigating former President Enrique Peña Nieto for acts of bribery. Now, what's the situation? All right, so here's a little bit of context. Mexico has a state-owned entity known as Pemex. We've talked about Pemex at length. This company deals with fuel and hydrocarbons. Allegedly, a whistleblower, reached out to the DOJ and the SEC and filed a complaint and presented some evidence that former President Peña Nieto received a bribe in exchange for ordering Mr. Emilio Lozoya, who used to be the CEO of Pemex, to buy essentially a bankrupt company at an inflated cost. So allegedly, the president receives a bribe, orders a public official to spend money on something that is worthless, so that the owner of the company can receive financial benefits. So there we go, the circle of corruption. Okay, so why is this relevant today? Or well, for many reasons, but mainly because it deals with a former president. It deals with the application of the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which is the United States law that deals with paying bribes to people in other countries. And it may have an element of law enforcement against a state-owned entity, which has very rarely happened before. So how does this work? Well, somebody blows the whistle or files a report with the authorities under the FCPA, under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and he or she, if that investigation pans out and results in a fine, then the whistleblower has the right or is entitled to at least 30% of the profit. So that's a very hefty reward. Now, so that's one of the things one of the issues why this is interesting. But secondly, if there is a fine, the fine will be imposed against the company that is paying the bribes or the company that is receiving the bribes, that is committing the crime. So what has happened before in other enforcement actions of the FCPA is that public officials are always involved, but only very rarely are those public officials named. Most of the time, the U.S. authorities are more concerned with, frankly, the companies that are paying bribes and imposing sanctions on them because of two reasons: because they can collect a hefty fine and because of the deterrence factor. Other companies will be discouraged from committing acts of corruption if they see how the miscreants are treated. Okay, so in that regard, it might be a bit inexact to say, or imprecise to say, that the U.S. authorities are investigating a former president of Mexico. But that being said, because of the size of the issue, the authorities, if they find evidence of wrongdoing by Peña Nieto, they will very likely inform the Mexican authorities, who will in turn have to do something about it, essentially initiating criminal investigations. Why is the U.S. investigating Pemex? Well, Pemex, as some of you might know, places not stocks but bonds, debentures in the stock markets of the U.S. So essentially, it gets investment from U.S. investors, and that places Pemex squarely under the jurisdiction of the DOJ and the SEC, specifically under the FCPA. Why is this interesting? Because it has the element of bribery, the elements of foreign bribery, paying bribes abroad. And because, again, most enforcement actions don't deal with state-owned companies, state-owned entities, or SOEs. Specifically, Mexico has declined very famously to implement international treaties or to prosecute state-owned entities, because it is, in a way, it is saying, well, it'd be like shooting myself in the foot. I own the company, so why would I sanction the company? But the problem with that is that it fosters an environment of corruption. Here, it would be, if this comes to an indictment and it goes to trial or it leads to a punishment, here we would have the authorities of the U.S. indicting a company, a state-owned entity from Mexico, which would be very, very new. Finally, there's an added layer to this. This comes at a time and in a context where Mexico and the U.S. are in very heated discussions of over very heated negotiations over um, immigration issues and commercial treaties under the USMCA. Essentially, the US government has been pressuring Mexico to strengthen, to enhance its security measures, and threatening that if Mexico doesn't do that, the US will enforce harsher trade measures, essentially tariffs and other things like that, tariffs and tariff-like barriers. Okay, in this context of the negotiations, this might be yet another chip that the US government might have to trade or might have in its favor to negotiate with Mexico, because it might be able to tell the US government might be able to say to the government of Mexico, here we have enough evidence, sufficient evidence to prosecute and to punish a state-owned entity, Pemex. Now, the fines might be huge, and if you don't want to have those fines imposed, or if you want some type of cooperation from the U.S. government, then you might be more inclined to implement other trade or immigration measures, security measures, things like that. So again, it's a bargaining chip that the U.S. might be using. We're not accusing them of doing it, but it's not it's not beneath President Trump to use a bargaining chip like this. Obviously, this is all speculative, so we don't know. But what we will do is we will follow this case closely, because it involves all types of corruption, all types of bribery. It involves obviously Pemex and a former president of Mexico, so it has the potential of being a huge case. We will keep track of this, and we will let you know of any new developments. But until now, this is what we have. So thank you for being with us. This has been, again, The Wife of Caesar. My name is Michel Levien, or Michel Levien, either is fine. And you have a happy Tuesday.